I don't know. You have a doctorate, right? You can't get it straight. But it's on humanities. All right. We'll have to get the Tova or somebody. Have to work in high tech. Your degree's also on humanities, right? What did you study in Columbia?
Computers.
And
English.
And English.
So I can,
okay. So you can swim freely in both centuries. So, okay. All right. Pru-revu. Okay. This is Siman Aleph in Even Ezer. I think it's important that we should understand what the foundations of the mitzvah are, the ramifications, which we're not going to talk about today. Maybe later in the year we'll talk about it. Which have very important. There are very important ramifications in terms of birth control, family planning. But first, I just want to talk about the foundations of the mitzvah. So, of course, we have the pasuk in Sefer Bereshit. Vayvarach otam Elohim, vayomer lahem Elohim, pru-revu milot haaretz v'chivshua, uredu b'dgat hayam v'of hashamayim v'chol chayam v'mes talat. Okay, so we have a mitzvah of pru-revu. So if you take a look at the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvot, Mitzvah Tasei Reish Yud Bet, shetzivanu lifrot v'lirbot ulechavein lekiyum hamin. V'zot mitzvat pirya v'revya. So the purpose of the mitzvah is for the survival of the human race. Okay? Lekiyum hamin.
If we're worried about the survival of the human race, we should reduce.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't like that, but okay. All right. Anyway, that's a different story. V'hu amro yitaleh pru-revu. Okay. U'mitzvah zo. I'm skipping a little bit. Towards the end. Ein hanashim chayavot ba. U'b'yamru sham ha'ish mitzuveh pirya v'revya avalo ha'isha. Okay. I'll talk about that a little bit later also. Okay. In Sefer HaChinuch, in Parashat Bereshit, yesh ba mitzvat aseh achat, v'hi mitzvat pirya v'revya, shenemar vayivarech otam Elohim vayomer lahem pru-revu. Mishoshei mitzvah zo, kedei sheyeh ha'olam miyushav. So this is, again, it's a global concern. Kedei sheyeh ha'olam miyushav, she'Hashem Baruch Hu chafetz b'yishuvo, kedichtiv lo tohu bra'ah lashevet Yitzara. He mitzvah gdola. This is an important mitzvah, which he derives from the pasuk in Yeshayahu. Shebesibata mitkayemet kol hamitzvot ba'olam, L'vnei adam nitnu v'lo l'malachei hasharet. Okay. Then we have some dinim of the mitzvah, which we'll see in the Gemara in a second. But let's might as well read it here in the chinuch, right? Dinei mitzvah matai chayav adam la'asok ba. V'kama banim yulo v'yipater, u'me'ez mitzvahu patur ba'asko ba, v'yeter pratim, okay, in Yevamot and in Brachot. Okay? And then, of course, right, he says that women up to rot, mitzvah zot eina mutelet al hanashim, v'mitzvatla bitel aseh, v'ansho gadol ma'od, ma'er ba'atzmo she'eino rotze la'ashlim chayfetz Hashem, v'yashev olamo. Okay? So there's a stress here on Yishuv Ha'olam. Okay? The Rambam talks about Kiyum Hamin. The Sefer HaChinuch talks about Yishuv Ha'olam. Okay, we'll come back to that also. I just want to lay out the mitzvot. Yeah.
I have no idea when in the course of this conversation this will be appropriate.
Okay.
Never.
Go ahead.
And yet. I want to push on Misha's question. I mean, if one is convinced by Paul Ehrlich from the 60s or certain angles of public health today,
right? Okay.
Or concerns about the climate, what have you, that
more people is
that
bad.
The carrying capacity of the planet is fast approaching.
So that okay.
How do we relate to that?
I think we'll be able to talk about it more when we get more into it, because I'm pointing out at this point the universalist aspect of the mitzvah. But let's hold on. You're right. You're right. You could, if you look at it as for the planet, then your question's in place. But let's hold on. Okay? There's a machloket, I think it's probably one of the most famous machlokot between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Right? In order to be considered to have been Mekayim the mitzvah, so how many children does the man have to have? Right? So women are P'turot. So we have as follows. The Mishnah Yevamot. Lo yivatel adam mipirya v'rivya, elem ken yesh lo banim. Beit Shammai omrim shnei zcharim. Beit Hillel omrim zachar u'nekeva. Shneimar zachar u'nekeva bra'am. What's the rationale for Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai? I didn't send you the whole Gemara in Yevamot, but the Gemara in Yevamot says that Beit Shammai learns from. The Gemara assumes that Beit Hillel makes the most sense. This is Zachar. They learned. It says Beit Hillel learns from Maseh Bereshit, Zachar Nekeva Bra'am. So they say, what does Beit Shammai learn it from? It says Beit Shammai learns it from Moshe. Right? Moshe has Shnei Banim. So they learn it from Moshe. Whether you learn from Moshe or you learn from Briat HaOlam could connect to this issue, we'll see it in a moment, this issue of how universalistic or particularistic is the mitzvah. Okay? If we're talking about Briat HaOlam, learning from Briat HaOlam, then we're talking about something that goes back to Maseh Bereshit. Clearly, God is speaking to Adam HaRishon. Okay? We're talking about humanity. If you learn from Moshe Rabbeinu, so then we'll see. Maybe this mitzvah doesn't apply to Bnei Noach, and we'll see that. We'll see that in a minute. Okay.
The assumption is, if Moshe hadn't been Mekayim the mitzvah, he would have kept having children.
Yeah, but then the Gemara says, but Moshe Rabbeinu knew that he had to stop. The Gemara goes into it. Okay. But that's what?
Because the Torah would have told us about all the girls that he had he had them.
Or maybe he did have them.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay, I'm saying. No, but we know he was Poresh Mishto, etc., etc. Okay. You can write your own midrashim. Okay. Just like we told us about Bakol. Okay. If we take a look in the Gemara in Yevamot on Daf Samach Bet, Amud Aleph, the next source here. So we have very interesting halacha, and the way the Rambam brings down the halacha is also very interesting. It says as follows: Itmar, hayu lo banim biyoto oved kochavim v'nit gayer. Right, the person had children, non-Jew had children, and he was mitgayer. Rabbi Yochanan Amar kiyem pirya v'rivya. Okay, Rabbi Lakish Amar lo kiyem pirya v'rivya. Rabbi Yochanan Amar kiyem pirya v'rivya. Da'havule, because he has children. Lakish Amar lo kiyem pirya v'rivya. Ger shenitgayer kekatan shenolad dami. Okay, so it does. He's not. Since Ger shenitgayer kekatan shenolad, so he's not related. Al pi halacha, he's not related to those children. So in order to Mekayim Pirya V'Rivya, you have to be related to the children that through them you were Mekayim the mitzvah. Okay? What's interesting here is that the Ger is Mekayim Pirya V'Rivya with non-Jewish children. Right? He had children when he wasn't Jewish, right? Unless he had children with a Jewish woman. Right, but that's presumably not the case. Right? So he had children before he was mitgayer. He was mitgayer, and then we say he was mitgayer. Rabbi Yochanan holds he was mitgayer pirya v'rivya. How's it possible mitgayer pirya v'rivya? There are two issues here. Right, one is he wasn't Jewish at the time. It goes to what is the mitzvah exactly, but he wasn't Jewish at the time that he had relations. So how can a non-Jew be mitgayer mitzvah? Right, that presume he's not chayav in. And the second point is, how is he Mekayim the mitzvah with children who aren't Jewish? Right? So we see from here, right, that you can Mekayim the mitzvah with children who aren't Jewish. Right? That's Pshat in the Gemara, which means that Pirya V'Rivya is about what is mashma from both the Rambam and Sefer HaMitzvot and from the Chinuch, that Pirya V'Rivya is about inhabiting the planet. And it's universal. Okay, Kiyum Hamin or Yishuv Lo Tobra Lashevet Yitzara. God did not create the world that it should be a place of desolation, but rather a place of habitation. Okay. Now, if we look at the Rambam, I gave you the whole perek, right, or a large part of the perek, and it's on the last page. It's close to it. Yeah, the last page. I gave you perek tet vav in Hilchot Ishut of the Rambam. So the Rambam says in halacha vav. Okay, he says as follows: Hayu lo banim. Are you with me? Yeah. Hayu lo banim bigoyuto vinit gayer. Listen. Hu vehein harei ze kiyei mitzvah zo. Hayu lo banim vu eved, etc. It's not our issue. Okay. But the Rambam it's not in the Gemara, right? The Rambam adds that in order to be mekayem the mitzvah, is necessary for the children to be mitgayer as well. So even though the holada was not when they were Jewish, the fact that they were mitgayer is he was mekayem the mitzvah. Right? This would indicate that the Rambam holds that the mitzvah, despite what he says in Sefer Mitzvot, that the mitzvah is not about inhabiting the planet, but it's about increasing the numbers of the Jewish people.
Or maybe he just thinks you can't do the mitzvah when you're not Jewish.
No, the mitzvah was done before, right. So that's a separate issue, which we'll talk about, right? So the mitzvah,
Or
let me just finish, okay? So al panav, you can only make the mitzvah if your children are Jewish, right? So that would mean a Jewish man who has relations with a non-Jewish woman, right? So there's another issue because the kid is not considered related to him. So here, okay, but
maybe
in the
that's
case,
just the issue. Maybe he's only like Reish Lakish, but he's just not related, and it's not a din in universalism.
no, but it's still not related according to Reish Lakish. Whether it's mitgayer or not mitgayer, Gershon Gag Tinok Shinolad is not related even to the kid is mitgayer. Okay, so the Rambam holds that here, at least, that the mitzvah is a particular mitzvah to increase the numbers of the Jewish people. But this issue was taken up. It's not pashut that this is true, obviously, because you see from it's against pshat in the Gemara. But if you take a look here in the Shulchan Aruch, this is brought in Siman Aleph Sif Zayin. So it says, Hayulo. Everybody with me? I don't know if I didn't send this to you. It's not okay. So listen. Okay. Hayulo banim behiyoto akum vinit gayer hu veheim. So Shulchan Aruch, not surprisingly, adopts the Rambam's approach. Hareze kiyei mitzvah zo. Okay. So the Beit Shmuel on that says in Ot Yud Bet banim biyoto akum. Okay, so he says, "Afakav the kaimlan gershin itgayer kekatan shenolad dami." So why should be mekayim the mitzvah? You're not related to them. Mikol makom kevan shebenachruto kvar kiyem pruruvu. What does that mean? Okay, the az hayaz zaro miyuchas acharav lachein hu patur. Kakatavatosfot. Okay, and then he talks about whether you need that the kids should also be mitgayer, and he says. Right, there are those that hold as disrilu afil lo nitgayu habanim gam ken kiyem puravu mikol makom hamechaber lo posek mitam zel machamat shar tamim. Okay, so he raises the issue that afil lo, he says mashmi tosot afil lo nitgayu banavimo kiyem puravu v'kakat v'chuat maharil. Okay, and it's pshat in the Gemara, right? Because the Gemara doesn't say that you need gairu would be sort of important to mention that if it was so. So, so here we have a machloket actually, whether we consider the mitzvah to be universal or to be particularly to increase the numbers of Am Yisrael. And I think that could depend on the machloket between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai from where you learn. Because if you learn from Ma'aseh Bereshit, so you're talking about learning from what God said to Adam, so that's universal. If you learn from Moshe Rabbeinu, so then you could say that's particular, right?
To learn from that pasuk, though, so the Bereshit pasuk, because it's not part of the command. It's just when God created human beings, that's what God did. To be Yotzei, God's give and creation.
All right, so that you get into Chassidus about Selma Elokim and how people, but that's
not necessarily a pasuk that says anything about
so.
what human beings should
So
do.
the Gemara says that the reason Beit Shammai doesn't learn from Beit Hillel is lo yalfinan efshar mi efshar. That's basically saying that's what God did and that's not what people did. Okay. But all that notwithstanding, if I learn it from the beginning of Sefer Bereshit, I'm talking something universal. If I learn it from Sefer Shemot with Moshe Rabbeinu, presume I'm talking about it as something particular. In the Minchat Chinuch, he talks about. I think this I did send you. Let's go back. That's the. It's not the first page, the second page. Hold on. Okay, I know I have to number the pages. I do this at 2 o'clock in the morning and I forget. Okay. We all have our challenges. Okay. So here, in the Minchat Chinuch, it's the second page. V'im holid bein obat mikol makom, afilu cheresh v'shoteh. Right. The point is, as long as the children can have children. Right? If your children cannot have children, so then you weren't mekayim the mitzvah. So even but cheresh v'shoteh, kiyem ha-mitzvah. Why? Listen to this rationale. Deheim b'nei mitzvot. Because the cheresh and the shoteh are chayavim b'mitzvot. But they're not chayavim b'mitzvot. Right? So how are they chayavim b'mitzvot? Sheheim b'nei mitzvah. The asur lahachilam biyadayim dvar isur. Uruyim laholid al kein yotzei dechovato. It says this thing that they have to be shayach to Torah mitzvot. So obviously, he's assuming, right, that you're only yotzei with having Jewish children. Okay? That's that the mitzvah is to increase the number of Jews. We also have, depending on how you want to read this, on Daf Samach Bet Amud Aleph, the different reasons given or sort of connected to the mitzvah of Puravu. Itmar, Hayu lo banim umetu. Okay? Before they themselves had children. Rav Huna amar kiyem pirya v'rivya. Rabbi Yochanan amar lo kiyem. Rav Huna amar kiyem. Why imkayim pirya v'rivya? Mishum de Rav Asi. The amar Rav Asi. Listen to this reason. Ein ben David ba ad sheyichlu kol neshamot shebaguf. You know what that means? Ein ben David ba. You know what that means?
We all have to die from shifting.
Okay.
There's a limited number of
Okay, so I'll tell you the simple.
number of people who are going to ever be born. And they
The
all-
guf. Okay, a little bit of Kabbalah here to explain. Maybe it's just not historically accurate to use Kabbalah to explain this retroactively, but okay, where the Har'el, where the neshamas come from? Which sphere? Do you remember?
I mean, they come from all the different ones. What are you thinking?
They come from Bina. Neshamot, the Olam Haba is Bina. Because Bina is the primordial womb. Chachma is the Zera. Did I ever talk to you about this? I've never talked to you about this. Okay, let's...
I'm pretty sure.
Okay? Alright, so then, now we have Rachel here. She can't leave when we talk about Kabbalah. The idea is, if you look at the... and even Joel is sitting in the back. He can leave, but he won't because he's curious about what's going to happen.
I'm thinking about it.
You're thinking about it. Come on, literacy, Cletus. If if you use the Shem Havaya as a model for the generation of the Sfirot, so the Yud is Chachma, is this seminal idea which comes out of nowhere. And that's Chochma Me'ayin Timatzeh, and that's Bria Yesh Me'ayin. So the Yud is also identified with Zera. And the Hey, the first Hey of the Shem Havaya, is made up of two letters, a Dalid and a Yud. The Dalid is Dalat, means emptiness or poverty. Right? So the Dalid is an empty vessel, which is impregnated by the Yud. Right? The Dalid is the primordial womb before conception. The idea becomes a concept, the Chachma becomes Bina. Okay? So the seminal idea, we have this in all languages, right? The seminal idea impregnates the primordial womb and becomes a concept. Yes, we have conception, right? And in that womb are all the future, all the nishamot, right? The womb is so Bina is the place where the nishamot come from, right? And this is called the guf because Bina gives birth to the vav. The yud impregnates the hey, and it gives birth to the vav, which is the next six sfirot, chesed, gvur, tiferet, netzach, hod, yisod. The next six sfirot, which is the male, it's called Zeir Anpin, the male, or Yaakov Avinu, if you will, and then that mizdaveg with the last hay, which is Rachel. Leah is the first hay, Rachel is the last hay. And the vav is the male, and you don't have to be Freud to realize that the vav is a phallic symbol. So you have Yud, Hey is the impregnation of the primordial womb, gives birth to Vav, and Vav then is mizdaveg with the last Hey. So all the nishamot, right?
Surely you don't think that's the shot of the Gemara.
No, what I'm saying, the idea that there's a place in Shamayim, so to speak, where all the nishamot gestate until they come into the world is embedded in this Gemara. Okay, that's what I mean. Okay, when the mysticism using the Shem Havaya actually, what I said, when that's described, how much, if it's before the Zohar, it's in the Zohar, so it's 13th century. Whether it's before the Zohar, I don't know. If I didn't see it in what we call it, in Sefer. I don't know if it's in the Bahir or in Sefer Yetzirah. I don't know if it's a separate issue, but it's in the Zohar. The use of the Shem that way is in the Zohar. Okay. Yeah?
It's not in the Bahir.
What?
It's not in the Bahir.
It's not in the Bahir. Okay. And I don't remember it from Jikatilia either.
I mean...
Anyway, Lo Mishaneh. We're not doing Kabbalah now, right? But, so the idea is, why am I bringing this? So we're talking, presumably, about Nishamot Yisrael. Right? Because you want to bring Mashiach, because all the divine potentiality... I once had this thing with, I met with a bunch of Catholic theological students from Germany that actually came to Efrat, believe it or not. And I totally blew them away when I said we're all children of God. And then I didn't, I said, yes, we're all. So what, the birth of the Nishamot come from, in a sense, inside God, according to this. Right? So the Nishamot, so you have this quote-unquote guf, right, that has the Nishamot. So all the divine potentiality has to unfold before the redemption. The complete unfolding of divine potentiality is the redemption. Right? So by having Jewish children, right, you bring more of God into the world. That's where you get this thing where they say if you're not Mekayim Revu, the Lashon is you pogem badmut. Right? That's the Lashon, it's in the Shulchan Aruch, right? What does it mean pogem badmut? Badmut of what? All right, so Shulchan Aruch, okay, it was after, right, so we're talking about 16th century Tzfat, and we know what was going on over at the time, right? So pogem badmut, right, so because Am Yisrael is a projection of God in the world. Right? So when you have more Jewish children over the generations, it's the unfolding of divine potentiality.
Like when you said Ashikalu Kol Nishamot.
And until all the Nishamot come out.
That didn't require, that was universalistic. That didn't
No, I don't think so. No, I think what he's talking about here, because it's Ein Ben David Ba, it's a very Jewish type of statement. It strikes me, you could say it's universal, but I think...
Ben David is the Mashiach who's going to help everybody, but even if it was a particular Jewish redemption, it says Kol Nishamot Shebaguf. Why would you think that only the
Yeah, you'd have to look at the Tanya where the other Nishamot come from. They come from the Oramik, they come from a place else. But the Nishamot of this Guf, other than Nishamot, in their conception, would probably be
Guf is
Nishamot.
God's Guf? I'm so lost.
It's the place where the neshamot are. In Rashi says,
Yeah.
presumably, quote unquote, it's God's good. It's, all right, in Indian mythology, it's called Parusha, right? And by us, the Arizal called it Adam Kadmon, right? And it just, okay. It's the problem is that modern Orthodoxy took all the spirituality away. See, that's why you don't know any of this, okay?
But you think that the
Adam
primordial
Kadmon is a different
Hashem,
model than
Adam the Kadmon is a manifestation of Hashem that is...
Yeah, the Christians also liked it for that reason, obviously, right? But if you take a look at Rashi, forget about all that stuff, okay? If you look at Rashi, Rashi says, Mishum Rav Asi, Klomar Tamid Depiri V'Rivya, Mishum Rav Asi, V'hai Kemesh Talo Al Yado Minishamot Sheboto Otsar Sheshmo Guf Harei Kiyeh Mitzvat Pirya V'Rivya. The name of the place where all the neshamot are is called the guf. Guf of what? Okay, I think we should stop here because we're being recorded.
The main point is that all people in the world died. The neshamot just have to come to the world, and so the fact that they are now dead is irrelevant. You've done your
right.
part.
Right, you've done your part. Right, it's right.
Neshamot to the world.
Right, exactly. All right. So this idea, I think, is particularistic. Okay, you have the certainly the way if they viewed humanity as a projection of God, the humanity they were thinking about is Knesset Yisrael.
Well, that's because all people are Tzelem Elokim.
Yeah, but different. Okay, let's
not.
not.
There's no effort. I mean.
Okay, but I'm just trying to think into Ein Ben David Ba is sort of a particularistic thing. It's a Yeshua for Yisrael, right? So it sounds like it's particularistic. In any case, we have two different views, and the nafkamina is actually very simple, right? If a person has non-Jewish children, then Mekayim Pru Revu. Non-Jewish children that they are related to. So the only way you could have that would be someone who is mitgayer, a man who's mitgayer, who had non-Jewish children, and if they weren't mitgayer, so he didn't add anybody to Am Yisrael, right, except himself, right? But you can't prove it with yourself. That would be an interesting thing to say. But his children are not part of Am Yisrael. So if you say that Pru Revu is inhabiting the planet, so he inhabited the planet, and he was Mekayim Pru Revu. If you say Pru Revu is increasing the numbers of Am Yisrael, so he hasn't increased the numbers of Am Yisrael. And this is the question that Eliezer raised, would be dependent upon this. If you talk about the increasing numbers of Am Yisrael, so then your question is a non-starter, right? If you talk about, right, in other words, you could say, I remember who said this, I think it's Greenberg said this to the Dalai Lama. There's some story about it, about having more children, right? So, I think, I'm not sure if he said it, but it might be in general. Maybe it's bad for the planet if you assume it's bad for the planet that there should be more people, but he didn't think that's where the Jewish people have to make their contribution by holding back, given what happened in terms of nationally our history. So we can let the Goyim not have children, right? In a sense. So I think if you have if your concern is global in the mitzvah, so then you can say the mitzvah. Maybe then you can have the question of, if it's so that it's bad for the planet, so we don't need the yishuv anymore, then you can say maybe there's a patur for the mitzvah, right? If you talk about it in terms of chiyuv to increase the numbers of Am Yisrael, either because you increase the mitzvot in the world or God's presence in the world, however you want to say it, so then the global concerns or the superficial global concerns, I don't mean by superficial as shallow, but the first glance global concerns would not be our concerns here. Okay? Yeah.
I think according to Rish Lakish, it doesn't seem like the machloket about universality. If it was that, his reason should be lav bnei mitzvot ninu or something like that. What he says is that lo miyuchas acharav. It's gershon garish katan shenolad dami. The issue is they're not connected to him. If it's an issue of being bnei mitzvot, he could have given that as his nimul.
So they both agree it's universal.
Yeah, I think at least in this machloket.
Right. Okay. They could. Right.
Because he could easily could say love name mitzvah ninhu, and that's
Right.
One thing I don't understand
Yeah.
about the paternalistic side is the mitzvah itself. Forget the pasuk of where you learn two sons or a daughter or son. Revu is said to everyone.
Yes, but the
how
general
does that
klal is
have-
nitnat Torah v'nitchadsha halacha. Any halacha is Gemara in Sanhedrin that any mitzvah that was given in Sefer Bereshit, if it wasn't said again at Sinai, right, then it applies only to Jews. And if it was said again at Sinai, then it's part of Shem Mitzvot B'nai Noach. Okay, that's the
counterintuitive.
I know it's counterintuitive, but that's what the Gemara says. Okay, so the fact that the Torah was given at Sinai, it became the Torah, the halachot of Sefer Bereshit, the universal mitzvot, which apply to all bnei Adam in Tul Matan Torah, stopped being applied to all bnei Adam and got transferred only to Jews. Right? And those mitzvot which were repeated, right? So, for instance, Gezel is repeated in the Torah later after Matan Torah. So that means that even though Gezel is part of Shevet Mitzvot Bnei Noach, the fact that it's repeated in the Torah, so it's repeated again for us, but it still exists for Bnei Noach. Okay? So that's the general principle. Okay? You're right. I mean, if you just read the Torah, it's of course talking to humanity, but after Matan Torah, so the focus became more exclusive, right? And then the question is, well, to what extent and what that exclusivity means, right? But that's beyond the scope of this discussion. Okay?
Wait,
Yeah.
Was your question about that or about the gender issue?
I wasn't asking. No, I was saying we had explained
Right.
that the machlokes between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel vis-a-vis the gender was because one was learning from Moshe Rabbeinu paternalistically, and that was our paternalistic model.
Paternalistic, particularistic.
Paternalistic? Did I say paternalistic?
Yeah.
That's
what
my problem.
confused me.
Particularistic.
Okay.
Still letters?
Yeah, okay.
I don't remember the. You understood me. You did.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay. So, all right. So that's in terms of whether the mitzvah is to create more Jews or the mitzvah is to create more people. Okay. And also the Minchat Chinuch about b'nei mitzvah indicates what he thinks. Okay. The next question that we have to deal with, which actually emerges from what we're talking about, is what the mitzvah is exactly. Right? Because here we were talking about a ger shenit gayer, and he was kind of mitzvah by having children when he wasn't Jewish. So this raises the question of what exactly is the mitzvah. Because in general, I was trying to think if there are any other examples of this strange type of situation. In general, we talk about mitzvot. You have a specific ma'aseh, which you're mitzvah to do, right? And if you do the maaseh, and the maaseh, sometimes the maaseh requires a certain result. Sometimes it doesn't. But if you do the maaseh, you makayim the mitzvah, right? Again, certain maasim are not certain mitzvot are not totally dependent upon you, right? Giving tzedakah, right? So I find that ani, I want to give them tzedakah, and they don't take it, right? So I wasn't makayim the mitzvah tzedakah, even though I wanted to, right? So it's not the maaseh might not depend entirely upon me, right? But it's still the mitzvah is to do a specific action. Okay, that's what we have in general. I'm trying to think if there's any case where that's not the case, except here maybe, right? In malachot, like when you talk about isurim, we do have such. They talk about malachot Shabbat, so we do have certain examples where the malacha is not a specific action, but actually the outcome. There are all these questions about if you're zoreya on Shabbos, but the zera only takes root after Shabbos, or if you throw something to the oven a minute before Shabbos is out and it cooks after Shabbos. So did you do a ma'aseh bishul? You didn't do a ma'aseh bishul. What's the malacha? The malacha is to cause it to be mevushal or to cause it to take root. This is machlokot and achronim when you talk about specific malachot. Okay, in mitzvot, I don't recall. Let me think of something. I don't recall an analogous problem, except here. Here, okay,
with Pesach,
with regards what?
With Pesach Bal Yimatzah, the result
That's the
oriented.
Isser.
Right.
That's Isser. Okay.
Can you explain Explain here what? Here
In this case, okay, it seems, well, if I ask you, what is the mitzvah of pruruvu? Okay, from the case of the ger shenit gayer, what are your possibilities? Also from the facts in the Gemara. Let's talk about data. So you have one statement in the Gemara that the ger shenit gayer, forget about whether his kids were mitgayer with him or not. That's not relevant now. If he has children, he was mekayim pruruvu, right? Okay, so that's one piece of data. The Gemara says that if you have children, but they die before they have children, so then you're not mekayim pruruvu. So I thought I was mekayim pruruvu, and then, right, the person thought they were mekayim pruruvu, and then the children died 20 years later before they managed to have children, so then you weren't mekayim pruruvu. So what is exactly is the ma'aseh mitzvah? Okay? So if we just ask the question, in a sense, before we look at the data, right, one possibility that we would say is that the ma'aseh mitzvah is the ma'aseh biyah. The ma'aseh biyah is the ma'aseh mitzvah. But you're not mekayim the mitzvah unless you have children. Right? So but the ma'aseh is the biyah. It's whether you're mekayim the ma'aseh is contingent upon the biyah having an effect, so to speak. Okay? In the same way that if I come to give tzedakah to an ani, I can give money, but he doesn't take it, so I wasn't mekayim the mitzvah. Not everything depends on me. Okay? But the ma'aseh that the person does is the ma'aseh biyah. That is the mitzvah. Okay?
So you can have a 40, 50, 60-year gap between the maaseh and the kiyum?
Yeah, you could have that. It's an anomalous situation, but that's what you're talking about.
It's just a very funny thing that why decide when you die whether you were Makayim or not? Just like, that's assuming that you're going up to Judgment Day and God's going to do the cheshbonos then,
All right, so
final cheshbonos then, and they can't be revisited later. Do you hear what I'm saying?
You get. There is an analogous situation when you talk about brit milah, right? So someone who's not a man who's not nimol, right, is chayav karet. So at what point are you chayav karet? So then, if you die without being nimol, right? So that's the Rambam. The Ravid says you chayav karet every day. Right, so there's an example where we don't know if you hold like the Rambam. I think it's definitely my Rambam right. I might be getting the
but that's
the
case
position
where it's
backward.
under your control.
Right, but it's not under your control when you can intend to be nimol and then die beforehand. It's not entirely under your control. I was going to be nimol, right? But I had a tour. I had a tour with the Moel in 7 months from now, right? What?
I said it's a lot more under your
It's
control
much
than
more under
whether
your
your
control.
children have
Okay,
children.
I'd say in terms of that, yes, but in terms of the consequences of kiyum hamitzvah or ikiyum hamitzvah are later, right? All right. So then, and what happened? How do we view that in the meantime?
By the way of that, the Nazis came and wiped out all the Puravu, retroactively of everybody. Right? It just there's something.
It would
not
have
allowed
to be,
per person,
by the time someone dies, right? If at times you had
Why?
children.
Right? Why? By
What-
the time
what-
Because
someone
lo
dies?
ameitim yahaluya. After kevish make nasen chavshim minat mitzvot, the cheshbon stops there. It's exeris akasuv that there's no kiyum mitzvos after you're dead. The nafkamina is after Tchias HaMesim, but we're not going to get into that here. After Tchias HaMesim, you won't be chayav in mitzvos. Right?
But I'll still have done the mitzvahs I did.
What?
But it's not. But maybe the mitzvah is not about the individual and your obligations. But we're supposed to populate the world. It's not your fault that we didn't. Like, we don't have to analyze it in this strictly like Maaseh Kiyum framework.
But we never talk about the umilut.
Oh, well, we do. So we do look at the consequences.
We
Right.
say, what's the mitzvah act? You're trying to think of the mitzvah act of the Puruvu, but it sounds like really we should think of the mitzvah act of Puruvu Milu.
Okay, so that's exactly what I want to talk about, right? So take a look here in the Tosafot in Bava Batra. 1 second. It's the first. 1 second.
One on page 3.
No, 1 second. I'll find which one. There are a couple of Tosafot Batra.
There's one on page 5.
Here, actually on page 2, right? Kofinet Rabo. Okay, the what's being said here.
Page 3.
3.
Okay. The Mishnah in Gittin says that if a person has a chatzi eved, chatzi ben chorin, how can someone have a chatzi eved, chatzi ben chorin? I buy an eved b'shutafut with someone, And then the shutaf is mishachrer, they're part of the eved, right? So the eved now is a chatzi, but I wasn't mishachrer in my portion of the eved. So it's a chatzi eved, chatzi ben chorin. So kofin et rabo v'kotei lo shtar shechur. Beit Din will force the owner to write a shtar shechur in order that the eved should be able to mekayem pruruvu. Okay? Kofin et rabo. Okay? So Tosfot says, V'im tomar, amai kofin, why do you have to force the owner to free the eved? Leti asay de pruruvu, v'yitche lo ta'asay de lo yeh kadesh. Because the person, what's the problem? Chatzi eved, chatzi ben chorin can have relations with no one. Because the chatzi ben chorin shabo, can't have relations with a shifcha kna'anit. That's an isur kadesh and kadesha, right? And the chatzi evet shabo can't have relations with a bat Yisrael. So he's stuck, right? That's what the Gemara says. Maya aseh. So he has to write a shtar shechur, right? So Tosfot says, why do you need a shtar shechur? You have the principle of aseh dochalot aseh. The only way he can become pruruvu is if he has relations with the bat Yisrael. So, okay, there's an Isser Kadesh. Well, yeah, Kadesh V'Kdeshah B'Bnei Yisrael, right? So there's an Isser Kadesh. So, but that lo ta'aseh is nidched b'fnei the aseh pruruvu, right? Amai kofin leit the aseh de pruruvu v'yitche lo ta'aseh de lo yeh Kadesh. V'omer Rabbeinu Yitzchak chada de be'idna de me'aker lav lo mekayem aseh. The principle of aseh dochalot aseh is that you have to mekayim the aseh at the time that you transgress the lav. Then the aseh is dochalot aseh. In other words, the standard example, right, is yibum, right? So the yibum, there's the aseh of yibum, and there's a lot aseh of eshet ach, right? So you mekayim both at the same time. Or tzitzit with kilayim. You lovesh the tzitzit. You makayim the tzitzit. At the same time, you would be over the isser kilayim. Right? So that's aseh dochalot aseh. But here, it's not simultaneous. Why? Right? As he says, the be'idna de me'ekar lav lo makayim aseh. Because when you're over the lav of lo yeh kadesh b'bnei Yisrael, de mishat ha'ara'a ka'akar lelav. At the time of penetration is when the lav of the Isser Bia is transgressed. But that's not when you're Mekayim Pruruvu. When you're Mekayim Pruruvu, the Aseh de Pruruvu lo Mekayim ad Gmar Bia.
You would have thought odd, haflad, no lad.
Right. So this is very important. So Tosfot understands that the Maaseh mitzvah of Pruruvu is Gmar Bia.
He says Mekayim.
Lo Mekayim.
With that, so meaning if we're splitting the mass and kiyum, then for Tosfot's not.
No. So it's what I'm saying. When I talk about the kiyum, is it's contingent upon, right? It be lahadil again. If on Shabbos you throw something into the oven, but then the oven runs out of gas, right? So there was no bishul of the chicken, right? So you weren't you did whatever you did by throwing it into the oven, and then it cooks by itself, right? But if it doesn't cook for some reason, you weren't over the malacha.
Well, enough of saying it's interesting that he says even if you haven't really finished the kiyum of the mitzvah, his halamina is that would be enough to be doche the lotas.
What?
What's interesting is it would still be enough to doche the lotas.
Right. So what he's interested, Tosfot assumes that the mitzvah is the bia. Okay, contingent upon later developments. Okay, but the mitzvah is the bia. Okay. If that's so, we really don't understand this business. What happens with Gersh and Itgayeh? Okay, but that's the position of Tosafot.
But wait, just on that.
Yeah.
What if you had this oven and he was on
this what?
The oven, the slave we were talking about, and before one of the partners, there was the whole.
The Evan, yeah.
He was already married to a shifcha and already had kids. And then he gets half set free.
Oh, so that has to do with the Eved doesn't have yichus. So that's the. If you look at the Shulchan Aruch and see if Zion, he talks about that case. It's based in the Gemara. Okay, but that's for another reason.
Oh.
Okay. So Tosfot holds that the mitzvah is the bia, and the having children part is the contingency, right? but the mitzvah is the bi'ah. Right? If that, again, we have a problem with ger shenitgayer, where that would seem to be interesting. Whether the kids are mitgayer with him or not. Right? But the fact that at the time he was not mitzvah and prurevu, and now you want to say he was mekayim the mitzvah by something that he did before, and the mitzvah is the bia, is problematic. Okay? There may be a way out of it, but certainly al panav it's problematic. There's another issue here in the Minchat Chinuch. He asks, the Gemara says b'feirush that if a person, based on Yerushalmi, if a person has a mamzer as a child, so the Mekayim Puruvu, the child is a mamzer. We say Mekayim Puruvu. What?
Yes.
Okay. So he says, take a look at this Minchat Chinuch. The Gam im holid mamzer kiyem hamitzvah. Okay. And he says the second line of the Minchat Chinuch. V'nir'eh midivrei agot Ramah b'shem Rashba d'satam hadavar d'lav dafka im hayalo mamzer beheter k'gon ger shemutar lisam mamzeret k'muvar b'gmara. Okay. But just because a person has a child who's a mamzer doesn't mean that we're over an isser. If you're a mamzer, right? If you yourself are a mamzer, right? Your children will be mamzerim. So if you assume, and it's not everybody agrees, if you look at the Minchat Chinuch, but let's assume for argument's sake that a mamzer is also chayiv in Puruvu, okay? So the only way the mamzer can be chayiv Puruvu is through having mamzerim, because any child that he has will be a mamzer. That it will be beheter, right? A mamzer marries a mamzeret, or the mamzer marries a gioret, right? So the child is a mamzer. Okay, so that's having a mamzer beheter. Okay? But he says, since we don't distinguish, so he says, even if a person has a mamzer be'isser, so a person has over gilui arayot, right? He says, ela afilu nolad be'isur, kegon sheba'al mamzeret, or al chivei karet, v'holid, mikol makom kiyem hamitzvah, ki benohu l'chol davar. Because al pi halach, if a person has relations with the gilui arayot, the child is still miyuchas acharav, linyan Yerusha, etc. So the child is still your child, as opposed to, again, if a man has relations with a non-Jewish woman, the child, al pi halach, is not their child. Okay? They're not related, al pi halach. Okay? But in case of Yitzirat Mamzerut, the mamzer is his child. Okay?
Can we relate it all to if the child is a mumar?
Again, it's starting to get talking about mumarut. If you say the mitzvah is particular to add people to Am Yisrael, so then you get to this thing like a mumar, like the minhag in the Middle Ages, in the time of the Gaonim, was that if somebody was Meimir Dato, if someone was Mishtamed, that his relatives would sit shiva for him. But that was a minhag. It's not that there's no even if Avelis is Doraisa, this is not Doraisa. It's not Avelis Doraisa. Okay? But that idea that now no longer part of Am Yisrael, then you get this thing about can you become not part of Am Yisrael, which is again a different. When we talk about Gerus, we'll talk about ways in and if there's a way out. Okay, sort of like Sartre's play, no exit. Remember?
Well, you're saying
there's a way out. Yeah.
There's no explicit addressing this. That really is a simple question, which is.
Does somebody say if you have a child and a mishtameh, right? No, I didn't see that related to, but I think by the time we finish the discussion, we'll be able to, based on what we say, we'll be able to relate to it. Okay? So he says, now listen. So he says that even if a person has a mamzer as a child, be'isser, I feel not be'isser, going to mamzeret, or al chivei karet, v'olid, mikom makom ki mitzvah, ki benohu l'chol davar, ki muvwar b'yivamot, etc. Okay? And he proves it no. Then he says, he has the following question. V'hiksheti, I'll skip down a few lines. Right? The Rif didn't mention this halacha. Right? He says the Rif, the Rush. So maybe they argue, maybe not. We don't know. He says, and then he says, "V'zez man kvar hiksheti." Everybody see that? Dilama yatzai yedei chovato. Why should a person, if they're over an Isser Karet during the Bia, why should they be Yotzei Pruruvu? Halohi mitzvah haba ba'avera. L'dat habe rishonim mitzvah haba ba'avera min haTorah eino yotzei. Okay? So, what's the easy answer to this based on what we're talking about? I ask you what the mitzvah is. Okay? This question only takes off if you assume that the mitzvah is the bia. So then, you want to be mekayim the mitzvah of bia in a biat isur. That's mitzvah baba avera. But if the mitzvah is not the bia, the mitzvah is having the children, and the bia is just the way you have children, right? It's a necessary prerequisite, right? And we'll talk about whether it's in what happens if mekayim with artificial insemination, right? That's what Moshe talks about. But let's just assume now, so that it's a necessary prerequisite for the leidah, but the mitzvah is not the biyah. The biyah is a hechsher mitzvah. Okay, so then there should be no problem in mitzvah baba v'ira, which is what he says, right? He says, im kain. Okay.
Can you clarify something simple about that I should know?
Yeah.
Like, how is this different than the assay coming in Dochel Alot? How is mitzvah ba'avera different than a mitzvah assay that's Dochel Alot?
It's like a flip case. In assay Dochel Alot assay, you be mekayim the mitzvah, right? And like the mitzvah assay, in fact, you become mitzvah assay is Dochel Alot assay. Right. Here, you want to be mekayim the mitzvah. The mitzvah doesn't need to be mekuyam by doing the avera. Right?
Ah.
Okay. All right. So he says that's not shy. Leka averu klal. Okay. Im kain hachinami kain v'dan mitzvah shel habanim bal yedei avera debiat isra mikol makom hamitzvat asay hainu habanim v'habi'ilahu rak hechsher mitzvah. Okay. Di efshar below ze. Right. V'haraya Im lo holid, v'chein im meitu habanim, lo kiyem ha-mitzvah. Kevan di'ikar kiyum ha-mitzvah heim habanim. Ube'et hazot, when there are the banim, leka avera klal. Da avera kvar na'aseit b'shat ha-bi'ilah. Dami lahotzi matzah mirshut ha'yachid l'rshut ha'rabim. These comparisons are always funny, right? Dami lahotzi matzah mirshut ha'yachid l'rshut ha'rabim. In order to get there, like Pesach came in on Shabbos, and you put the matzah there Rshut ha'rabim. So you oversee. You don't say it's mitzvah baba avera, right? The mitzvah baba avera would be if the matzah was usher to eat and you ate the matzah, right? But here the avera happened before. Okay. So the Minchat Chinuch holds, and the data in the Gemara is very strong for this, that the mitzvah is not the bi'ah, the way Tosot says. Tosot clearly says the mitzvah is the bi'ah, and that's why they have this problem of asay dochalot asay, and they negotiate it within the different stages of the bi'ah. From the Pshat and the Gemara, both with regards to the ger shenit gayer and meitu banav, that the mitzvah is having the children, okay? But the way you have the children is to engage in biyah. So the mitzvah would be to produce children that are connected to you. That's the mitzvah, right? So that's how we're mekayim the mitzvah. That's how you have children that are connected to you. So that's why there's no problem in mitzvah haba ba'avera. And this connects also to the tshuva of Moshe that I gave you. Moshe is very interesting. It's a very interesting tshuva. Besides that, right? Rav Moshe talks about tshuva here in Igros Moshe from Eben HaEzer Chelik Bet Siman Yud Chet. He talks about what's called akarut hilchatit. A woman can't become pregnant because of zayin nikiyim, right? So he talks about. He alludes to the possibility to be mevatel zayin nikiyim, to go back to the din d'oraita of nida, when because of zayin nikiyim a woman can't become pregnant. He says right. That's why I said he alludes to it. Yeah, he says, well, maybe we'll have a personal conversation about this. I don't want to write about it. Okay, and even there he's doubly careful. He says, and then it'll only be a theoretical discussion. So then why does he want to have it? So anyway, and why did he print? And why did he print it? right? So, I don't know who's responsible for the printing this tshuva, right?
That artificial insemination cares about the Shabbat.
So, if you think the way Tosfot thinks, that the Maisa Mitzvah is the Bia, right? Look, think about, you learn Masechet Brachot, right? So we talk about Biat Mitzvah, that the first night, the Chassan is Pater Mikriyat Shema, is a Biat Mitzvah. What's the mitzvah they're talking about? The mitzvah they're talking about is not the mitzvah's owner. The mitzvah's owner is all the time. It's not the Biat Mitzvah, they say the mitzvah is Pru Revu, but the child will be born later.
Pru Revu is always a mitzvah too.
Right, but it says Tir to the mitzvah, right? But he's especially preoccupied with it now, right? But the mitzvah is Pru Revu.
Are there no other opinions on what the mitzvah could be?
I don't know.
It's not Kedusha.
There probably are other.
But no, because then that would have implications. You could be Pater from Kriyat.
Okay, I understand, but that's where. But that's
there's other
okay.
To
But you talk about the mitzvah being the bi'ah. So then you could say it's artificial insemination. So there are two issues. There's no bi'ah, and then the question is.
that would be still your masabiyah, the artificial.
No, it's not. There isn't. So then you wouldn't be Makayim Pru Revu if you took the zera of the husband and you fertilized the woman through the wife through the zera of the husband. It could be that what Rav Moshe says is not true, right? Rav Moshe says that it's clear to Rav Moshe that the man would be Makayim Pru Revu that way. That's his assumption.
Rav Moshe says it's clear.
Yeah, it's his assumption. He says that you can read the truth. It's his basic assumption, right? That there's Kim Pru Revu that way. If you take Tosfot very literally, right? So you could say the mitzvah is the Maisa Bia, because that's Darko Shel Olam.
Would you ever have a kiyum without a maisa?
It depends. If the mitzvah is that something should happen, that you should. This has to do with how you define the mitzvah. If you say the mitzvah is the bia, you could interpret that literally, that you need a maisa bia, or you could put it a little differently. When Tosfot says that the mitzvah is the gemar bia, even though Tchilat Bia is Bia for Isurei Bia. So what Tosfot might be saying is that the mitzvah is that you have to do your best to have children. The act is doing your best to have children. So that's obviously the Gemar Bia, right? Doing what it takes.
Yeah.
Doing what it takes, right? So in general, that's the Gemar Bia. But if doing what it takes is artificial insemination, so the xerix is extracted. He talks about it has to be extracted b'derech heter, has to be extracted from the husband and injected into the woman, and then that would be a kim of Pru Revu. Okay, but it's clearly if you hold, you don't have to get into this whole discussion. If you hold that the mitzvah is the way the Minchat Chinuch says, and which is more implicit in the Gemara, the mitzvah is having the children, right? In others, having children that you're connected to, that you brought into the world. So, but there is no, in a sense, there is no Maisa mitzvah. It's just having the children at the end. That's the mitzvah. So then it's clear. Then that's a non-starter. Then of course you kind. But if you assume that the child is miyuchas to the father, if there was no bia, but that's a pretty reasonable assumption also, which Rav Moshe is willing to go by. Okay, he's willing to assume that. Okay,
so in some ways radical.
What?
That's a radical assumption.
I don't know. I think intuitively would say that the zera comes from the father. You would say that the genetic father is the father, right? It would be a real, I think, a legal revolution to say that the zera of the father is the zera. It's the father's DNA, but there was no bia, so the kid is not yoresh the father. If it's a daughter, there's no Sigili Arayas.
We're putting in like DNA testing as.
No, but they didn't know about DNA. But they knew that the zera came. That they had the mixture of the zera of the Av and the zera of the Aim. That much they knew.
There are precedent cases, aren't there, in the
you don't need a Nobel Prize in biology to figure that one out. That somehow only. That after you're like 7, 8 years old, you realize it's not when you get married that you have children, that you actually something physical has to happen, right?
But as long as the couple keeps having relations, there's kind of plausible deniability that it's the artificial insemination that's doing it.
All right, but
so, that's... go and figure out where,
Who knows she got pregnant.
Okay, so that's in the. First of all, certainly today you could figure
Well,
it
but we
out.
do it the other thing.
No,
We
but
do
you-
it the
but
other
you
way.
don't-
We
but you
name
don't
the
have to
Jews
figure
No,
and
if you're talking about
non-Jews
akarut,
and
no.
non-Jews because
Look,
the
what you're
assumption
raising is a secondary claim about verification. Let's